This video is for a procedural rhetoric project from a web-based interactivity class. The main point of the project was to, by using Minecraft, critique the benefits and deficiencies of procedural rhetoric. Later I will talk more on what I think of procedural rhetoric, but first I will explain the short journey of building my first structures. The first thing I wanted to do as soon as we spawned in was to find a good place to build my initial structure. The spawn location was near a bunch of plains and small hills, but one of my first thoughts was I wanted to do something inside of a mountain. So I ran for a while and eventually I found a pretty good set of mountains and climbed to the top of the tallest one I could see. One of the first things I did when I got to the top of the mountain was that I built a few floating trees. I did this for landmark purposes and also aesthetic purposes. The next thing I did was to level the top of the mountain so it was nice and flat, and then I began to dig down. Basically I just kept digging straight down until I got down as far as I could go. I ended up digging all the way to bedrock, but the bedrock was too uneven, so I had to dig up a few blocks so I could make a flat floor for a room. And this is the room that I started, just building a few blocks in a square, and finding a bunch of materials here helped me to get started. I began to dig the walls out farther to make a big room for which I could eventually call my home. I built a crafting table and a furnace and a chest to store supplies and create tools that I needed. I soon realized I did not have enough resources from the surface to continue living down within a mine, so I had to dig my way out. I eventually dug a small staircase that led outside to the side of the mountain, and it led to a really cool view where I saw this little sand island, and I thought that would be a really neat thing to use eventually. I wanted to make some glass, so then I went over to the little sand island and I dug out a couple layers of sand so I could use that for later. When I got enough supplies from the surface, I went back down and I began to create another room slightly above my main room, which would be more of a mining area. I began to build another big room and a little side area for some storage, and then I also built a little gateway to my main mining area. I also kept digging this room out bigger and bigger just so I can get more resources. I had two mining directions initially. This way was going to be just a really big wall to mine through to get as many resources as I could. I dug out this wall for quite a while, hoping I would get a lot of resources, but I ended up not getting a whole lot from this direction, so I discontinued that. So remember that little island that I had found earlier? I wanted to do something with that, so my next goal was to build a tunnel and make a railway system that led to that island. So I dug out a thin pathway that led from my room to the island. I began to get resources for building powered rail, so that way I could have a sort of tram system that went from my place to the island. As I dug up and out of the mountain, I realized this pathway would be underwater, so I thought it'd be cool to make a glass underwater pathway that led to the island from here. Eventually I dug the tunnel all the way to the island, but most of this was underwater, so it was really hard to see anything, so I couldn't get a lot of screenshots of that. Eventually I got to the island, and then I dubbed this to be the eventual beach house. As I said before, it's a sort of tram system, so I wanted to make sure there was a nice entrance and exit from the beach house. I finally got the whole tram system up and running, and it works really good now. At this point I wanted another way to get outside of my underground room, and I also wanted to be able to work with my classmates. My classmates were working on building their own little village called Okayville, or Okayland, or whatever you want to call it. So I began building to become part of Okayland, which led to the most okay rail system to Okayland, which was a long straight tunnel that I built from my mining wall to Okayland. This was also done by a powered railway system. After I am connected with Okayland, I am now a resident of Okayland. So fittingly, this became the most okay storage room. I also had the most okay mushroom farm, because everybody else was making farms and there's not a lot you can farm underground, so I decided to farm mushrooms underground. Then we also have the most okay mine entrance, which leads to my main mining area. This is where I got most of my resources, such as coal and iron and everything else, because there was down here there was a huge ravine which I scoured and got a lot of resources from. Then if you take the stairs down, we come to the most okay inside mountain house room, which is my main room. Then there's also the most okay railway to the most okay beach house. After a suggestion from a classmate, I redid the entrance to my mountain room. It used to be that you had to enter through lava to get into the room. I wanted to make sure people could survive getting to my place in the first place. So instead, what the suggestion was that I take out the lava and I place a sign at the bottom of this hole, and then a block above that I place a source block of water, so that way it will slow the descent of anybody falling through. I also created the most okay bed, and this is the most okay inside mountain house room after it has been almost fully decorated. I made stone brick walls and ceiling. I created stone slab flooring with redstone blocks, obsidian, and coal blocks, just for a little decoration. Now we'll talk about the actual point of this project. As I stated before, this was to critique the benefits and deficiencies of procedural rhetoric. The main point I got out of doing this project from procedural rhetoric, or the main argument, was that I found that during this assignment was that you can do or make just about anything if you try hard enough. That's the argument that I received by interacting with the processes of this game. Now I would like to talk about some of the issues that I have with procedural rhetoric. I feel like procedural rhetoric is very narrow and specific compared to some of the other newer forms of rhetoric. This is because it is specifically with the procedure of something, and everything may or may not be able to produce an obvious procedure, or any at all. And even if there is a procedure, the procedure itself has to be clear enough that the message or argument is able to be pulled out of everything else that is going on. This is also not something that the normal person is focusing on, so getting this idea across and getting the average person to start thinking about it and to start looking at things and finding their procedure can be a little tricky. This seems, for the moment, that this is mostly limited to video games for experiencing a procedure. There are not a whole lot of mediums that let the consumer physically interact and experience the content. For example, a painting wouldn't really have procedural rhetoric for a viewer or consumer. The artist may have done the painting using a specific procedure, but unless that is explicitly explained, then nobody else but the artist would know about the procedural rhetoric used. Some of the things I'm in support for procedural rhetoric is that if the issues can be worked through, this could provide an extremely unique and intimate way of providing an argument or a message or emotive experience. Having the creators learn about procedural rhetoric could greatly help with the designing process of whatever work is being created. They could design in with the procedure more emotive and precise experiences. Now how my structures relate to procedural rhetoric. Everything I made is basically a metaphor for my explanations of how I feel about procedural rhetoric. I made my house buried deep down within a mountain, since this is a fairly new concept which is covered by other newer concepts. I also have my place in the bottom of a mountain because once the procedural rhetoric concept has struck gold, there could be a lot of possibilities that entail. I also have my main room branching off to a few different directions because procedural rhetoric can go in many different directions once it is more so established and researched. My main room is also so empty and big so that it can eventually be filled with a bunch of cool stuff and ideas just like the procedural rhetoric.